Okay, so hello everybody, and welcome to the first official Think Tank, first episode of Think Tank. I don't even know if you want to call it an episode, but we're gonna see how things go here. I made not necessarily a flub, but I released the video that I just did a little too recently, so everybody's like clearly watching it right now, and so we'll see how many people come over from that video and join as we go. But tonight, as you probably already know, we're having a discussion with a few doctors. We'll see right now we're starting out with Dr. Avi, and we're going to start on the topic of DHA, which you can see here. It's something that's been heavily requested for me to respond to. Is this Jeff Nelson of VegSource made a video basically saying that the claims of Dr. Greger to take DHA supplements for vegans is not actually what we should do. It's unnecessary, and certain people like Joel Furman are really just trying to make money, which just led to a vegan on vegan feud, which then later, Clapper knowing Jeff Nelson came out and said, actually, no, we shouldn't be taking DHA supplements. And so I just want to say hi to Avi right now. Avi, you can say hi.
Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing?
So Avi is a doctor. Do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Avi. I'm a medical doctor. You can usually find me in the Ask Yourself server where I was veganized. I am a plant-based doctor, and I do a number of debates. I debate both philosophy as well as empirical debates related to health, and happy to be here.
So you were not vegan before that server?
Correct.
Oh my! So you went there and you got full on converted.
I went there and I had battles with Isaac, and then he veganized me.
What is this? Somebody just posted ridiculous. Yeah. Okay. So that's the nature of Discord. For those that are not familiar, it's a little bit more raw, and people tend to try and be little tricksters on here. Anyway, so that's cool. So what was like the main thing that pushed it over the edge for you? Was it the moral discussion, the ethical discussion, or?
Definitely the ethical discussion.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
For those that don't know, that's a philosophy-based server mainly, and so it's getting into the philosophical arguments there. But Avi, being a doctor, is a good person to have to bounce these ideas off each other. And so I don't know if I'm going to make a video about this yet, and I still am sort of making my mind up on it. I have a position, but I'm not particularly held to that position. So really quickly, I just want to nutshell a few things. So Dr. Greger and other doctors, a few of them mentioned taking DHA supplements, which are algae supplements. They're vegan. And most of you probably already know that we get ALA, which is a sort of shorter chain amino acid from plant foods. We then can convert it into DHA, but there's debate, and anti-vegan people often say that there's no way you can convert enough DHA. And so we then had VegSource saying, hey, actually, this is a whole scam. We don't need to. And then he pointed to some studies and some things that we'll talk about in a second. But right off the bat, Avi, what is your position on supplementing DHA for vegans?
So my position is it actually depends, and it's a little bit contextual. So that's going to be a little bit anticlimactic of an answer, but we're going to have to get into a lot of nuance. Let's just get right into it. So for omega-3 supplementation in general, there are several studies to point out with respect to our DHA levels and EPA levels and how they compare to non-vegans. So you need two things. So you need to have an established level of what is deficient, what is not deficient. And there's a lot we don't actually know about that. There's more we don't know about EPA and DHA than what we actually do know about EPA and DHA. But we do know some things. So there are some studies that show that vegans have lower levels of DHA, and it's theorized that that's because of the decreased conversion from ALA into DHA. However, there are some studies that show when we're compared to omnivores, which may not have the best ideal diet for getting their omega-3s. There was one study comparing vegans to soldiers, and they found that there was actually no statistically significant difference between their DHA levels. And there actually was a statistically significant difference between the EPA levels, and the EPA levels were actually in favor of the vegans.
Interesting. You want to talk about EPA for a second, like what it means?
Yeah, sure. So from within the category of omega-3s, you have two things. You have EPA and DHA. And we convert them from ALA, and the conversion rate is pretty low. But the question of the day is, even if the conversion rate is low, do we actually need to supplement these things if we have a low rate of converting it ourselves? There are types of omega-3 fats, and they're important for many different functions. And they're also important in pregnancy. We'll get to that later, because that's one of the situations I actually do recommend supplementation. It's actually one of the few situations I recommend supplementation. There's also the other thing we have to talk about is a recent meta-analysis that came out for supplementation in heart disease. The history of this has been just to give people a backstory of this. Meta-analysis after meta-analysis have come out for looking for benefits for EPA and DHA supplementation. And it's been very hard to show a benefit until recently. And by recently, I mean September of 2019, when American Heart Association Journal published a meta-analysis updated from the 2018 meta-analysis, including 3 more trials to get to 13 trials from 10 trials, which was enough to get statistical significance, although the effect size were low. But it did show a benefit.
Do you think that was from the lower inflammation levels of it? Do you think it would be any omega-3s, or do you think it was DHA specific? It's hard to say. I don't know them.
Hey guys, sorry to butt in. The next doctor has arrived. So
all right.
We have Smod here, who runs the channel Tactical Medicine. Everyone should go watch his video on LDL. It's really great. So you have voice permissions now, Smod. Can you talk? Sorry to cut you off. We can't hear you, Smod. Well, you figure out your mic, but you have voice permissions now, so you should be able to talk.
There you go.
Yep.
Cool. So we're deep in the DHA discussion, but if you want to just quickly introduce yourself, absolutely do it, because you're part of the panel. Oh, no, he died. He's gone.
Uh-oh.
Not enough DHA.
He's fine.
Oh, man.
He's good with technology. I don't think we'll have
I'm totally joking. Cool. Well, we'll have him come in when you have him come in, but you want to continue where you were?
Yeah, sure. So actually, I should be posting these studies in general, so I'm going to be doing that. So I think general is a good place to post it, unless you want me to post it in Think Tank.
Post it in Think Tank so people can actually see the links as they're watching back this video. That'd be great.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So this was the meta-analysis that was recently published in the AHA journals, and this basically was the culmination of many different trials, and after meta-analysis of trying to get trials to find a statistically significant difference in cardiovascular health outcomes such as cardiovascular disease, death, stroke, those mortality metrics. And they did end up finding it when they included these 3 additional trials. But the thing to note here is that the effect size were pretty low. So if you look at the relative risks, they were statistically significant. However, the relative risks were modest. They weren't the most exciting decreases in disease rate or outcome rate. That being said, it may still be something worthwhile to consider. The complicating thing here, the thing that always complicates most literature on omega-3 supplementation and omega-3 intake, is the following problem. And this is for many trials. The complicating issue is whenever you're consuming omega-3s and you're increasing your omega-3 intake, whether it be EPA or DHA, it usually comes in the form of decreasing some other types of fats. And very often it turns out that it comes in the form of replacing saturated fat. Mm-hmm. And so this begs the obvious question. So why do we see health outcomes? Are we seeing health outcomes because there's a supplementation of EPA or DHA, or are we seeing health outcomes because EPA or DHA is replacing saturated fat?
Yeah, and that's huge, and that happens in so many studies. So they have verified that there is some type of anti-inflammatory sort of pathway for omega-3s, though, right? I mean, I've read about it. Is that just...
Sure. Yeah.
Okay,
so, in fact...
Sorry, guys, but now we have another doctor. So here's...
Okay, cool. So let's take a break and do...
Sorry, here's Dr. Tushar Mehta. So can
Tushar,
Can you speak, Tushar?
Is Tushar?
He's here. He's Dr. T.
Yes,
That's him.
cool. So yes, I have met Dr. Tushar before in Toronto. He's a super nice dude. And Smod, do you want to give me a test of your mic too? No, apparently it's not working. He did. He did.
In here right now who can't get their mics.
Anyway,
Tushar and Smod, you guys both have voice permission, so you can talk whenever.
Whenever you're ready, I would like to introduce you both, and we can move from there because I want to open it up to larger discussion with everybody. But as of right now, we are talking about something very interesting, and this is just something that happens so much where you have a negative aspect of animal products that gets sort of conflated with something else, or it just gets mixed up in the data. And so I want to move though back because I think we kind of covered this here. I want to move back to some of the claims and share some of the claims now that everyone's here that were made back in the veg source videos. And so and Dr. Greger's position in general, there is a study that was done on DHA. And by the way, DHA supplementation is usually in the form of fish oil, which of course then has other, can have heavy metals and things like that, which can totally mess with things. So we don't have enough studies on algae, but that DHA in that fish is the same.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, you're Tushar's here. Hey, how's it going?
I'm here now. Hey, is that Mike?
Yeah, good to see you again. I'll introduce you really quick.
Brother. How you doing? Sure.
Yeah, good. You're from Toronto, and
yes.
You're a doctor, so if you want to give yourself a quick nutshell introduction, go for it.
Oh, hey, I'll also say, Tushar, don't refer to Smod by his actual name in here.
To who?
Your friend.
He's joking.
Whose wedding I met you at.
One step
Smod.
Yeah,
okay.
He's Smod.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Tushar. I'm a physician from Toronto. I practiced family medicine before, but now mainly emergency medicine. And for a long time, for a few years now, I've been studying, just like Mike has, all the different medical research that comes out related to plant-based diet and health, as well as related to environmental issues. So I'm a vegan doctor, yes. And I'm also involved in giving talks and trying to also teach other healthcare professionals as well whenever I can.
Heck yeah. And so what is your position on DHA supplementation for vegans?
So that's on the you went straight up to.
I mean, we're talking about it right now, so you might as well. If you have one.
Sure,
I mean,
sure. I do. I mean, when I look at the evidence regarding DHA supplementation, I feel that it is equivocal. I feel that, I see that there are some studies that in the long run show that there are maybe some benefits, others showing that there are some harms, others showing no benefits. And I don't believe that people necessarily have to supplement DHA, but by eating a lot of the broad-based, healthy foods, we do get omega-3s, maybe not EPA and DHA, but we get the ALAs, and we get them in high quantity. The body will probably convert whatever it needs to DHA or to other, or to whatever it needs to, and it's smart that way. And we're going to be okay. You don't have to get expensive, algae oils and all those kind of things. But if you want to, hey, knock yourself out.
Yeah, cool. So I definitely view it as somebody who's not a doctor, as from the data that I've seen, it doesn't seem that, people are going to be dropping dead from not taking it. But, if you have extra money floating around and you feel like you want an insurance policy, then fine. And we have to think, we have large vegetarian populations who also don't consume DHA from fish. And so technically in terms of DHA, they would be, correct me if I'm wrong, they would be nutritionally the same in terms of DHA as vegans. So vegans and vegetarians, the same there. Looking to the Adventist vegetarians, longest, one of the longest living populations we have, also including vegans there. I don't think there's a case that they're dying off really quickly because they don't have enough DHA and things like that. But that brings me to, you mentioned the harms. And that brings me to one of the claims that is made in VegSource's video is he talks about a study where there's actually a slightly increased risk of prostate cancer for people taking DHA. So if either of you want to talk about that, go for it.
I'm just trying to pull up some of my studies right now that I have in a good list.
Yeah.
Mike, do you want to take a crack at it first?
Okay.
And I'll chime in once I pull up
Or
the
Avi,
studies.
if Avi has something to say about it. Otherwise,
I'm actually not aware of the prostate cancer study.
yeah, I mean,
I'd like to see that.
I don't find it compelling because, if I recall correctly, it was on fish oil. And so, yeah, of course, there might be an issue with maybe heavy metals or something with fish oil, or it could be, just could be some type of other it could be picking up some other type of effect. I wasn't swayed, but that was one of the reasons that Clapper also gave for like, hey, you might not want to take this. And that also brings me to something that is, at the core of Dr. Greger's recommendation, which is a study that found that DHA supplementation or DHA status in elderly people was associated with lower brain shrinkage, so higher DHA, lower brain shrinkage. But that was criticized also in this video because it was not a lower dose. It was actually a pretty high dose. And so they were saying vegans aren't even taking this dose. It doesn't apply. You have to be taking this massive dose. And I believe, though, it's a little bit of an irony because I think it also had to be really high dosed for that prostate cancer association as well. So, make what you will of it, but I'm not super sold. And
I'm not super sold either. There's this. I'm just looking at some of my list of studies here. There's a 2018 study that's a Cochrane review that says that there's no benefit from DHA EPA for cardiovascular disease, including heart attack and stroke. There's a JAMA 2018 study that I have here that shows no benefit of omega-3 use, specifically referring mainly to the DHA EPA. There's a 2017 study, again JAMA Internal Medicine, where again there was there was no benefit, and there's a host of studies that show no benefit, and there's some that do show a little bit of harm as well. So I don't think it's going to be super harmful, but I just don't think it's super necessary either. And there's a lot of hype around it, so sometimes we think, oh, maybe I should take some, but it's more due to the hype than good evidence showing benefits.
Yep. But then you were talking about pregnant women.
Oh. Yeah, I was. Oh yeah. Well, yeah. I just want to assent to what was just said because I think I've seen the same thing for. You mentioned brain shrinkage, and I think I've seen the same thing for studies with dementia and Alzheimer's, and it's pretty equivocal from what I've read. Some studies seem to show that there was some benefit. Some studies seem to show that there was no benefit. So, both on the case of cardiovascular disease and in the case of Alzheimer's disease, it seems fairly equivocal. The other, and this is not to mention where the central issue with all of these, with that I haven't seen a study that really seems to get around it that well, is that they time and time again, and this applies to both Alzheimer's and it also applies to cardiovascular disease, is that there's some replacement of saturated fat. And if you're supplementing omega-3s at the replacement of saturated fat, you need to have some form of a way of controlling that out.
Yep.
That's a good point too. With all of these studies, you have to see what people are actually doing in reality. And in many cases, there are factors like that. They may be consuming something, but then less of something else. They may be consuming other things that are good or bad concurrently with their diet. Who knows? But you mentioned pregnant women, and I don't think there, again, is good evidence that people who supplement with DHA, EPA have higher, let's say the kids have better development or higher IQ scores or anything like that. We think based on physiology that it may be important. But again, I'm going to say that if you're eating like nuts and seeds and all kinds of other foods that do contain plant-based omega-3s, your body will take care of what it needs.
Got it. So I have a follow-up there, which is I know a lot of vegans end up eating a lot of high omega-6 oils, and there are studies showing a lower conversion of EPA to those longer chains, of ALA to longer chain EPA and THA, because my understanding is that they sort of follow the same pathway, and having too many omega-6s can kind of block it. And that's probably a grossly oversimplified explanation. But my concern, though, would be if somebody is slamming in those omega-6s, do you think that they might need to be taking DHA, or do you think there's any? We just don't have studies, I guess, on vegans high omega-6 in that.
There's a couple of studies. There's more than one study showing that omega-6 actually does have health benefits. For example, that 2018 Cochrane review that I mentioned showed that there are some small trials showing benefits of omega-6 consumption. And I think we start splitting hairs and we get into all these minutiae over the omegas, but it's the bigger macro things that really make a difference. For example, sticking to, whole foods, overall low fat, and having foods that are plant-based, and also consuming a broad base of these plant-based foods. So you're having nuts and seeds and different kinds of vegetables and fruits and whole grains and all that stuff. And your body's going to get what it needs. If there's a few extra omega-6s there, that's okay, as long as you're not eating, tons of fried food and putting too much oil in all of your cooking. Your body's going to take care of what it needs.
But would you be worried about somebody who's on what I consider like a standard vegan diet, eating a decent amount of fried food, high omega-6 oil, high omega-6 ratio, and really not even considering ALA at all? Like they're not concerned about getting enough ALA. Like, do you think that could be an issue? Do you think that, I guess they could just be switching to eating more ALA instead of taking DHA? Like, that wouldn't necessarily be a reason you need to take DHA, but I don't know. It just gets my gears turning.
I think that we don't have enough studies that really tease out those differences, and we sometimes extrapolate too much. Mm-hmm. But what you're describing, Mike, I think that was Mike's voice, is an overall bad dietary pattern. Yep. Like, there's an overall, people are going to be eating too much refined carbohydrates, maybe too much sugar, some fried foods, and too much oils, and those kind of things. And the overall dietary pattern is not good, and that's the major concern. Now, in there, you get some more omega-6s, but that's not the real problem. The real problem is the overall dietary pattern is not as good as it should be.
Okay, and so to answer Castor Troy's question, should pregnant plant-based women, newborns, and infants supplement DHA? You were saying that it's probably not 100% necessary, but you could do it sort of just if you want. Was that my understanding?
I think that we'd be doing it more out of the influence of popular opinion, or the influence of so many people's opinions, rather than science in this case. I think definitely we would want people to eat flax seeds and hemp and whole grains and so many other things that do contain a mix of omega-3s and omega-6s and everything like that. So you're getting all of that stuff, right? Then on top of it, if we want to take a little bit of omega-3, sure, okay. Maybe we can do that in the form of some flax oil. Like Mike, you have some really nice videos on how much you convert. And so that's one option. Or you may throw in some marine omega-3s. That's fine. But I wouldn't overdo it, because there are so many examples when we take too much of particular nutrients, we end up worse than we thought we were going to be as well. Like, studies on vitamin A, vitamin C, and all that stuff. Yeah, it's the overall dietary pattern that generally benefits us, not necessarily specific nutrients. Except in the case maybe of B12. But again, in B12, we don't have great evidence of what really it means to be, have a small B12 deficiency. But I wouldn't overdo it on B12 either. I'd just try to supplement till you get to the normal range.
Avi, you want to step in? You want to talk about pregnancy?
Yeah, a couple of things. Well, we'll talk about pregnancy. Okay. But before that, we were talking about, to answer your question about omega-6 as someone who's slamming omega-6s. The issue you're getting at is omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. But the issue is, Mike, is that we don't actually know what the optimal omega-3 to omega-6 ratio is. And I'm not convinced, based on everything I've seen, that anyone really knows what an optimal omega-3 to omega-6 ratio is. The only thing I've seen is a recommendation from some peer-reviewed journal. But I didn't see anything that's based on. Some people have recommendations of 1 to 4. Some people say between 1 to 1 or 1 to 6. I think it's just they're just pulling it out of their hat. Yeah. I don't know what they're basing it on.
Yeah, kind of saying get both, and then make sure you're not getting too many omega-6s. I know some people have just simply based it on this is what we believe has been eaten throughout like history, which doesn't even necessarily mean it was the best thing to eat. But if they are looking, we'd have to look. There might be some studies on like inflammation markers and ratio, but who knows? That could also be associations as well. Either way, interesting stuff. If you guys have any more points on DHA, we can do it. If anybody,
well, we can talk about pregnancy a little.
Yeah,
DHA and pregnancy. So I agree with the previous points with respect to things like retinal development, things like brain development, and things like we had mechanistic speculations that because omega-3s are very important in the development of the fetus, that it would improve cognitive outcomes. And the data on that have been equivocal. Some have shown some benefits, some have actually not shown any benefit for cognitive function, cognitive outcomes for the baby when the mother is supplementing with omega-3s. But recent developments have found a different sort of benefit for DHA supplementation in pregnancy. And the irony is really just term length. So supplementing with omega-3s have been found to decrease the rate of preterm births. And what's interesting is that they haven't been found to also prolong pregnancy past the point of term. So it could be that the benefits are not necessarily neurological, even though we thought they would be. It could just the new speculative mechanism is that there may be an inhibition of prostaglandin E2, and that may cause that inhibition of prostaglandin E2 may prolong the term and somehow not prolong it too much, which it doesn't seem to prolong it too much, and it just decreases the rate of preterm birth. So that may be a benefit.
Can you nutshell prostaglandin for people who don't know it in like a sentence?
Yeah, it's an inflammatory compound. It can cause the in the case of pregnancy, it can affect the uterus, and it can affect contractions, and it can cause the mechanism may turn out to affect the gestation.
Yep. And then to even back up even further, we had a question: what does DHA do? And it has several roles in the body, and the one that we tend to be most concerned about here is literally that it has a structural role in brain health. So that's probably the biggest one. But then there's another one that, and this is funny, and you can research this later, Avi, but it's kind of not super important. But the theory for why DHA, high levels of DHA, might cause prostate cancer has to do with it like destabilizing the prostate, like all these, like it's probably not based on anything real, but you can look into that later.
I got to say that's a new one. Yeah, I haven't heard that before.
Yeah.
One interesting thing I'll add about prostaglandins, because Dr. Avi mentioned that. So, you'll hear very frequently people saying to pregnant ladies not to take anti-inflammatory medications like Advil and things like that. And one of the reasons for that is because that can potentially lower the levels of these inflammatory markers, prostaglandins. And when they're lowered, you can get premature heart defects. There's this thing called PDA, or patent ductus arteriosus. So sometimes that can cause premature heart defects, and then that can lead to spontaneous abortions and fetal damage. So so prostaglandins are connected to the potential use of Advil causing adverse effects in the fetus.
The human body is ridiculous. It's just like crazy system, and we know so little, I feel like. So I'm trying to think if anybody has any more questions on DHA. I think we can wrap it up and move on to the next topic. I guess my last point, if we want to just dip into the drama really quickly here, was that there is still like pretty hot debate going on among the sort of popular vegan doctors. There's major, we're talking Joel Furman being attacked by, it's not a doctor, but VegSource, Jeff Nelson of VegSource, and then Clapper coming out. And there was actually a brief response on Red Pill Vegan's channel by Dr. Greger on this, and he was just cast the same doubt that we did of, were these prostate cancer studies done on fish oil or were they done on algae oil? And it turns out some of them at least are done on fish, or at least the one I think that was compelling and used was done on fish. So I'm not concerned. I feel like it's almost like if you have the money and you want to cover your bases, like just maybe taking DHA a couple times a week just to feel like you're like mentally okay. It's actually an emotional supplement. It sounds like more than anything.
I think what you're talking about is the influence of when everybody's talking so much about a topic that it makes us feel anxious if we're not doing it or something like that. But I think that really these studies about, let's say, pregnancy or others, these are single studies. These are sometimes very small studies. And we can't hang our hat on that kind of evidence all the time. I think that stuff should pique our curiosity, but not sway us too much. We have to be a bit cool about them. Yeah. And also be very, very careful, because a lot of the information that people are deriving, let's say about omega-3 to omega-6 ratios and stuff like that, they're not coming from clinical studies with clinical outcomes about morbidity and mortality. They are physiologic studies, which are basic science studies, and you can't base too much. You should not be basing things about clinical outcomes on physiologic studies. We should be looking at studies that are good clinical studies, and then finding bigger studies and those that repeat their findings. And
for sure, and this is why we need millions and millions of dollars all the time. And I'll say I'm really happy I did this already right away, because I had a little bit of a revelation, which may or may not actually be what's going on. But the study that I mentioned earlier that Dr. Greger uses to sort of say, hey, you should take DHA, about having higher levels was associated with less brain shrinkage. Avi was mentioning that higher DHA is inversely associated with saturated fat consumption. So more DHA means less saturated fat, and we know that Alzheimer's is clogged brain arteries to a large extent, and so that, of course, is driven by saturated fat. So one could almost make the argument that it might have that study at least might have nothing to do with DHA, in the sense that DHA isn't having a direct effect. It could be that saturated fat is just lower in those people with higher DHA. Therefore, they are choking their brain from nutrients a little bit slower than everybody else, which I think is super, super interesting. I'm going to try and research that. So if any final thoughts on DHA, go for it. Otherwise, I want to move on to this next topic.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what was said about the evidence hierarchy. You always have to put this in the framework of the evidence hierarchy. A lot of times you'll find mechanistic speculations. You'll find a lot of mechanistic data. You'll find studies on mice. You'll find petri dish. You'll find pathways. And it's very hard to take that and extrapolate that to clinical outcomes. In order to really get the clinical outcomes, you need just that, the clinical outcomes. You're going to need the large prospective cohort studies. You're going to need the randomized controlled trials. Yeah. And going forward, for answering these questions of if there is any benefit to supplementing DHA, to spending the money, and if it is, where would that lie, and how would it lie, that's really where the focus needs to be. It needs to be on the outcome-based data. It needs to be on clinical outcomes. It can't be just based off mechanisms.
Yeah, super huge. And if anybody wants to share the evidence hierarchy, go for it. Getting a little bit of an echo of my own voice in somebody. Okay, it's gone now. Cool. So I think we'll move on to the next topic, which is something I mentioned probably too much. And I'm just going to drag a couple images in here, because these are, this is the study that I talk about with vegans having higher blood levels of free protein, of serum albumin, than meat eaters. And I do talk about this a lot. I talked about this in my recent video that I just did. Yes, the nutrients, asparage nutrients, a little emoji, very relevant. So we have theories as to why this is the case. And I mentioned the theory in my recent video that it might literally just be the inflammation association, because it's C-reactive protein. And this is from Dr. Greger. I don't want to take credit for this, and obviously we probably don't have enough studies to say it's absolutely 100% the case, but that seems to be the best going theory right now. That C-reactive protein that responds to inflammation might actually be eating up some of your serum albumin, or competing with the liver, creation of protein synthesis in the liver and lowering the serum albumin. And so, just to be clear, I've been challenged on this, and yes, people who have protein deficiencies have lower levels of serum albumin, and so vegans are actually further away, at least in this study, from a protein deficiency. So if you guys have thoughts on this, chime in.
Well, I do agree. States of malnutrition can be found with associated with decreases in albumin, really pre-albumin, which can be a marker of nutritional deficiency. But I'm not aware of CRP in and of itself chewing up serum albumin or protein being used to generate CRP and that decreasing the levels. The main thing I want to just point out here is that I want to make clear that, well, first of all, the biggest thing here is that there's a difference between statistical significance and clinical significance. So a lot of times you get studies like this and you find a statistically significant difference, but the difference is well within the reference range. So if we look at the reference range for serum albumin, it's 3.4 to 5.4 grams per deciliter. And this is going to be well within the range. You're giving this units in the chart you posted is in grams per liter.
And that's actually the reference range. What's in the box is actually the reference range.
Yeah.
Guys,
okay.
How do I see what you're posting? I'm very bad with
text. Go to the think tank. Yeah, go to the think tank.
Think tank text channel is right above the voice channel, but below the little drop down.
Okay. Oh, I see. Okay, here we go. You're posting stuff
you see.
Okay. And I go to the bottom, is it?
Yeah, just scroll down, yes. Okay.
And
then you'll see.
There you go.
No problem at all.
Thank
no,
you.
I'm happy. I'm very happy to be getting people that aren't normally on Discord in here, although some have already been scared away. That's okay.
Yeah. So the thing is, if you look at this difference, you're seeing a statistically significant difference, but the key point here is that both of these values are well within the reference range. And to me, that indicates that while it may be statistically significant, I'm not sure that this is something that I would say is clinically significant of a difference.
Yep.
And I agree with what you're saying there. That's very true. Sometimes you can have these results by chance. I don't know how many people were in this study. And we don't always know the significance. Just because you have higher protein levels or albumin levels in this case may not necessarily be because somebody has adequate protein or inadequate protein or anything like that. There are other variables that may push these levels up and down slightly. We may be aware of one pathway and attribute it to that one pathway or another pathway, but there may be 10 other pathways that we don't know about. So it's hard to know what that really means. And again, this is a biomarker, and we should be focused more on clinical significance and clinical studies rather than biomarker studies. There's a lot of, I think, pitfalls and dangers and irrelevance and waste of time when you look at too many biomarkers, except for very specific ones, let's say cholesterol, blood pressure, hemoglobin A1C. Those things we know lead to clinical outcomes, but even still, we should sometimes question those too. And this is just, again, another random biomarker that we seem to find in our favor. And whether it was in our favor or not in our favor, I think that it doesn't really mean too much anyway.
Yeah, I mean,
I like this guy.
Yeah,
Can I just say that I like this?
And then
we're gonna get along.
I would just say, from my perspective of constantly debating people or talking to people who still believe that you can't get enough protein on a vegan diet, I feel like this is something that's, at least for me, been useful to show. Be like, hey, well, at least it doesn't look like vegans are, about to die here. And I also want to mention that I just shared a quote from a study and a link to the study that it says, quote, inflammation was shown to reduce albumin levels irrespective of the patient's nutritional state. So that's just one piece of a hint that it's possible that there is a connection. I mean, that C-reactive protein response, whether it's the C-reactive protein itself or just inflammation representing disease and disease lowering albumin, because higher albumin is associated with lower mortality when admitted to the hospital and things like that. I don't have the studies linked here, but that's interesting stuff. If anybody has,
Mike, what you're saying is just shows the level of detail you're going to. I think you're amazing, right?
Thank you.
But again, I think there's plenty of ways we can show that people who are vegan get enough protein. The clinical the proof's in the pudding. You see lots of vegans who are athletes, this, that, and everything, and they're not suffering from protein deficiencies and dying from protein deficiencies. I've never treated somebody who's, vegetarian or plant-based and having that. So that's I don't think this is the way that we're going to show people that, vegans are not protein deficient. The other thing that you do, you use chronometer and other things to show that, hey, listen, look at all these different protein sources, and it's very easy to get your enough grams of protein. Look at vegan athletes, etc. I think that's even more, even though those are not studies, some of those things are anecdotal, they still are a little bit more relevant than this albumin thing. Now, you may be correct that because of decreased inflammation, we may have slightly higher albumin levels. That may be one of the mechanisms at play here, but it also may not be.
Yeah.
And when we talk about low albumin levels in people who are hospitalized, leading to higher mortality, those studies are specific to people who are sick and in the hospital. That does not necessarily apply at all to the general public who's just walking around. So we don't want to take a clinical study and put it in the wrong context of people. That's not something that we should do. That's not the good use of those studies. Relevant to know about,
right.
but it's not the relevant thing to tell to the public.
Yeah. I mean, these are just things that I've used in direct response to claims about serum albumin and things. That's why I've researched it. Of saying, oh well, what is it even? Is it even better to have higher albumin, or it might be worse, or they might say it's worse to have higher albumin, and then I'll go and say, well, actually, the trend is that it doesn't appear to be worse. But yeah, obviously, in the general skirmish that goes on between like me and people who are eating all meat all day long and literally pointing at vegans and saying, actually, that person's dying of protein deficiency. Like, it's just a hard conversation to have. And then, for example, in the recent Chris Kresser on Joe Rogan debunking the Game Changers video, and then my response talked about, they say, we have Chris Kresser and they're saying, oh, actually, animal protein is just vastly superior based off like these DIAAS scores and stuff, and just throwing all these things out there. And then I also would might as well bring this study to your guys' attention, a recent one from 2019. Just want to see your reviews. This is fun. We get to just review all the studies. A recent study it is a clinical study, animal versus plant protein, and I'm just going to go under my video I just posted. It's funny, I use my own videos as like references for things. Animal versus plant protein and muscle mass. And I think it's really interesting that we weren't actually seeing a difference in these two, and I'm glad I looked because I forgot to link it underneath that study, which is fun stuff. So it's under my Eric Berg video, so I'm just going to pull that up really quickly, and then you guys can look at it. But basically, to nutshell it, they looked at protein intake, animal protein intake, plant-based protein intake, and they said that it is, general protein is associated with increased skeletal muscle mass, but it's irrespective of the type of protein.
I remember that study too. It's a good study to refer to. And I think that makes it's a lot more relevant than this albumin studies.
Yep.
But those guys with those stupid scores and whatever they're saying, those things are all totally bogus. It means nothing, And we can show that there are, plant-based athletes that are killing it. That there's studies like the one you quoted. That's a good study. And then again, the clinical data showing that people eating all this, animal-based foods are suffering from cardiovascular disease and, have higher mortality from all-cause mortality and various things like that. So that's the important part.
Yeah, so this is a classic example, Mike, of when their side actually makes the problem, where they infer this mechanistic speculation. They have the scores, and they're going to say that, well, because we have these scores of this protein versus that protein, we're going to extrapolate it out. But the point is, if you're going to do that, the outcome actually has to be borne out. And if the outcome is not borne out, then there's something. Then at the very least, your mechanism hasn't accounted for the whole picture. And that's, again, I'm just going to be repeating myself. I can't stress how much the emphasis needs to be placed on the outcomes and not the mechanisms. And the reason for that is because the mechanisms are subsumed within the outcome. If you do the proper study, if you do it right, you're going to there's so many different mechanisms at play here The key is what's going to control for other factors and subsume the mechanisms to see what outcome is going to actually happen. So you can't just take a look at a mechanism and try to extrapolate what the outcome is. It actually has to bear out.
Yep.
And I totally agree with what you're saying. Now I'm just going to consider it from Mike's point of view for a second. You know? and Mike's point of view actually is that he's challenging all these people. He's in this online arena where you're challenging people online and going tete-a-tete with these guys, right? So in that context, they're putting up, some postulated mechanism. You're countering, with a better chess move, so to speak. And in that context, if you're going at them and sort of nailing them, also showing that you're about 10 times as smart as they are, go ahead, and challenge them with all these little points, and that's cool. And then you can, if you want to, I think what we're saying is you can say one more thing, and that is to say that, okay, we're talking about all these mechanisms. I'm countering their mechanism with better mechanisms, but I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to take a macro view and look at the fact that, people who are plant-based have less heart attacks, less, mortality, lesser of these cancers, less diabetes, less cholesterol, better blood pressure, on top of the fact that we're getting enough protein. So you can just slam that on top of it all. But in the arena of, dueling, maybe what you're doing is cool,
Yeah, it's hard to figure out what's the best point to push, and then at what point are you just being condescending by citing so much more research than them? I'm just kidding. I want to take a quick moment to thank my 4 Patreon members that are here. You guys are awesome. And for future reference, we had some difficulty connecting Patreon and Discord, but we successfully finally did it, so that should work. And then I also really quickly want to say, if anybody wants to hop on and voice with a question, they're welcome. If they just want to say, I have a question in text, we'll put you on, and you're welcome to ask one, because I want to get, more voices in here. It'll be fun. And then we're going to move on to another topic. We had a topic suggestion, which is, we're officially... I think we've talked enough about protein now. Unless somebody has any more points or any more questions there, I think we're all...
I wanted to just add one quick thing.
Do it.
Yeah. So when, a lot of patients are very concerned about nutritional deficiencies and protein deficiencies and things like that. Aside from a certain nutrients, like commonly deficient things like B12, vitamin D, iron, things like that, nutrient deficiencies causing clinical effect are not that common. And if somebody wants to have a kind of a look at what a real protein deficiency is, take a look at the disease called Kwashiorkor's disease. So that's a disease that you see in people that are sometimes in the underdeveloped world, and they're really starving and have true protein deficiencies. And you'll see that they're extremely malnourished looking. They're anorexic looking. They have protruding abdomens because their livers are filling up with all these lipids because they can't make lipoproteins because they're protein deficient. So they get these big swollen abdomens. They're cachectic. Their arms and legs are just, there's barely any muscle tissue. So when people and patients come to me and they say, what about my protein? What about my nutrients? When I tell them about intermittent fasting or I counsel them on diet, and they're worried about that, these are the kinds of things I explain to them to really paint the picture that you're very, very far away from these clinically significant nutritional deficiencies.
Yeah, and I will say Kwashiorkor does have, as I just mentioned in a study in that video I just released, Kwashiorkor people also have super low serum albumin, for what it's worth, clinical protein deficiency.
That's true.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But that's an extreme case.
All right, thank you for your input.
To add on to what Mike said, if you want to talk to Mike, we can watch it for you, Mike. Just at him. So when you type in general or think tank, just put at and tag Mike the vegan, and the mods will watch for those comments, and they can either read your comment if it's a written question, or if you want to be put on voice, can be put on voice. But tag Mike so we can spot them out.
Great, yeah, and major thanks to the moderators for keeping things going smooth here, and definitely, at me in the think tank text channel instead of the general, because that's what I'm looking at here. I'm trying to have streaming here. So We
Mike,
yeah.
sorry to
I was
interrupt.
going to
Can I
say
say one more thing?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to pose this to everybody in the floor and the other doctors. The other doctors are great, and so I just wanted to put this on the floor. So a lot of times we refer back to the 7DA studies, Seventh-day Adventist studies, because they're so strong and they controlled for so many confounders. And I really like that study for showing endpoints, especially with male patients, and showing them, like, when they ask for research, I can show them, hey, look, this study shows you very clearly your decreased risk of dying on a vegan and plant-based diet. Did anybody have thoughts, the other doctors or anybody else have thoughts on, or I guess theories of why the females in the 7DA study did not do as well as the males?
With heart disease.
This is a question Sorry?
With heart disease especially, I was going to say.
Exactly. So, and this is what I posed to. I posed it to all the prominent vegan physicians, Dr. Bernard, Dr. Furman. I sent messages to all of them, Dr. Greger, and I didn't get any responses from any of them. So I think Dr. Avi had a thought on that, but I can't remember what he said. So I just wanted to pose that as a question. I don't know if you want to do that now.
All right, yeah, we'll try and hit it for a bit. If we don't know, we don't know, and then we're going to move on to if vegans should take supplements of choline, as many people have been saying they should lately, especially Emma Derbyshire, who works for the choline industry. Small detail. Not to poison the well of the conversation at all, but would you guys have any thoughts on this disparity between the two? My initial take could be, at first, that men tend to eat more saturated fat. I have a really old video called Why Women Live Longer, which talks about the dietary disparity between the two. One could also be the excess estrogen in their bloodstream, which can help protect them a little bit against heart disease. What do you guys think?
Avi, did you want to respond? Because I think you...
yeah, it's pretty... Well, I don't... I mean, if we're trying to hypothesize about the disparity, it's going to be very hard to do so.
Yeah.
There does seem to be... I mean, one thing I've heard is that, well, males compared to females have just this higher baseline rate of having heart disease in the first place. So if a diet does decrease its risk of heart disease, it would have a more pronounced effect on males than females. But then why would females seem to do worse in a vegan group in the Seventh-day Adventists? That really doesn't add up. It doesn't account for everything. I'm not convinced of any particular explanation for why the disparity is.
I don't think women did worse than the vegan women did worse, or the plant-based women did worse in the Adventist group as compared to the omnivore group, women in that group. They just didn't show as much benefit as the men did. I think what Avi's saying has, and what Mike is saying too, has good merit, that men tend to eat worse, generally speaking. So when they do eat better, you're going to see a bigger difference. Like Avi said, men do have a greater baseline risk of cardiovascular disease, and so there's a trend in a lot of the literature that the higher your baseline risk, the more benefit you seem to get from plant-based foods. For example, Black people sometimes benefit disproportionately more, than the white population in some studies, and so because of their higher baseline risk, they may benefit more when they actually do something good. Women tend to live longer anyway. So it's now another interesting thing about the Adventist and the EPIC studies is that you have this healthy volunteer bias. So the omnivore group in the Adventist and EPIC studies, they actually eat a lot less animal products than the average person in their society. And then the vegans and the plant-based guys aren't necessarily always vegan all the time either. They consider themselves so, but they're not necessarily always vegan. So the dietary difference is much less. And I like a lot of these studies that show people in percentile groups, and you look at the highest versus the lowest percentile consumers. A lot of new studies are coming out that way. But I wouldn't worry too much that the women didn't benefit as much as the men did in that group. It's just, that some of those factors that we probably talked about.
I also want to clarify, I'm pretty sure I know exactly what you're talking about, it might be in the Beyond Meatless study where it's looking at the gender disparities in vegan heart disease rates. And I believe that, well, it looks like there's a slightly, it's like 1 point something. slightly higher than 1, but it wasn't. I don't think it was statistically significantly different for those women. And it was very much statistically significantly differently lower for the men. And so whenever you see those numbers, just make sure to check. And we should probably talk about sometime in the near future, maybe do another night like this, looking at like evidence hierarchy and confidence intervals and things that, statistical significance, so we can get that.
Yeah. So the in the Seventh-day Adventist 2 study, for the vegan woman, with respect to, it depends on what metric you're looking at. For all-cause mortality, they didn't show as much of a benefit, but it's oddly, ischemic heart disease, the effect size actually was higher than the referent, although that wasn't statistically significant.
That's exactly what I was just saying.
It was 1.39, and then we had 1.18 for cardiovascular disease, but there was overlap with 1 for the confidence intervals for all of these things. And even if you compare the vegan men who had this great benefit with 0.45, with their confidence interval is 0.21 to 0.94, which also would overlap with the vegan woman confidence interval of 0.87 to 2.24. You actually do get overlap here, so it would be a hard case to even make if there is a statistically significant difference between the men and the women, although it seems to be getting at the point of statistical significance.
Cool. So we have a question here. I don't know if it was the next one in the order from Check Chick. Do you want to get on? No, you should ask it. You should ask the question so people who are listening can hear it. So we can give you permission to talk really quickly if you are able to talk. Otherwise, I don't want to force anybody to talk, or if somebody doesn't have a microphone. Okay, she just wants it answered. Don't be shy in the future, but she was asking what do teenage girls have to supplement in order to be healthy. I think you guys could probably nutshell this pretty quickly. We can say, obviously, B12, we can all agree on that. Is there do you guys have any specific recommendations for type of B12 or anything like that?
I think for the overwhelming majority of people, cyanocobalamin is just fine.
Yeah, just fine. There's no studies on that.
There's some very, very rare genetic pathway condition with problems in methylation, which may give a mechanistic reason to supplement someone with methylcobalamin instead. But in the overwhelming majority of cases, cyanocobalamin is the most studied. It's the cheapest. It's very bioavailable, and I don't see a reason to spend the extra money on cobalamin or other forms as opposed to cyanocobalamin.
Cool.
I think that's beautifully put.
And so any other supplements that you guys can think of? Young women are often told they should supplement iron, but what are your thoughts?
Well, that's contextual. If sometimes young women can experience menorrhagia, which is heavy periods, and they can become anemic. And in those cases, in that context, I would recommend supplementation with iron.
Cool.
But other than
I agree. If somebody's done a blood test and they have an iron deficiency anemia, specifically iron deficiency anemia, then go ahead and supplement. But otherwise, you don't need to.
Because the quickest way to get up. Because the quickest way to get up is just supplement.
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, that same woman can also Google, vegan iron sources, and start going after those a lot more, concurrent with supplementation, and at some point probably get off supplementation in many cases. If they do need to supplement, I think an important point is don't start thinking like, oh, my vegan diet is not working for me, or failure, or doubting. People are, getting a little bit too OCD about these things. Do the supplement if you need to do the supplement. Take the fantastic, the good iron containing foods from a plant-based diet. And if that takes care of it for you and you can get off the supplement and just go for the diet, great. And if you can't and you still have to supplement sometimes, hey, that's okay too. Don't worry about it too much.
The one other thing I would add is that some patients have iron deficiency without anemia. And they sometimes do benefit from iron supplementation. So they have kind of a clinical picture of fatigue or kind of malaise, and you're kind of controlling for other lifestyle factors that may not be optimized. So sometimes there can be benefit, assuming they're not getting adequate response to a dietary intervention of supplementation, even in the picture of no anemia.
I think what you're talking about there is when somebody has low ferritin levels but a normal hemoglobin, right?
Correct.
Now, I think there's again some things we got to look at when we see how they've created what they consider normal ferritin levels to be. That is through consensus. That is not through randomized control trials or any other thing that scientifically tells us that your ferritin levels should be between these levels. These are guesstimates made by experts, basically.
Sure.
And there is some evidence that having high iron levels may not be good for you. So if you're in the low normal range, and this is what I think Avi was saying before, is that if you're in the low normal range of ferritin, you're probably okay. The ferritin level is such a broad range, and sometimes if you're in the low normal range, you feel like, oh my God, I'm so low because you're such a far away from the high normal range. But the high normal range may be too high, for all we know.
Yep.
If your hemoglobin is good, I would say don't worry too much about the ferritin. Because it's your hemoglobin that really counts.
I would respectfully disagree with you, Dr. Tushar. So first of all, I agree totally that there's a lot of evidence that we do have to raise the ferritin levels and improve iron deficiency in the context of anemia. But certainly there are a subset of patients that have a definitely normal, definitely low ferritin. I agree with you. A lot of these ranges are guesstimates. Totally agree with you. But if we use those guesstimates and they are very low, and they're clinically presenting to you with symptoms that otherwise could be anemia, like fatigue, I've seen in my practice a lot of patients that have supplemented and have improved. And I think if you look up to date, I believe there is some evidence and there's some discussion about supplementing people with iron deficiency without low hemoglobin and the clinical outcome and clinical benefit. I'm not suggesting that people supplement iron if they're low normal just because they're worried about a number. That's not my suggestion. My suggestion is if there's a clinical picture that you're concerned of and you've controlled for everything else, sometimes doing that can garner a benefit. Another kind of analogous kind of example of that is vitamin D deficiency. So we all know that vitamin D deficiency is associated with so many problems. One of them that Dr. Furman brought up, which was very, very masterful, is vomiting, right? And so you get these patients that have horrible cyclical vomiting and you control for everything, you scope them up and down, you do all these different tests and nothing is kind of bears out. And I had patients like this where they had vitamin D deficiency, and then when you correct it, the vomiting goes away. So again, this is very, very individual. I'm not suggesting everybody with a low iron supplement and be scared and raise your iron levels even if your hemoglobin's normal and your iron levels low normal or even low. I agree with you that if the patient's doing well and they feel well, then there's no role for that. But it's more with the symptomatology and the if you're looking up to date, there's a discussion about that.
Cool. I think that's a fine way of looking at it, And I'm going to take a look at the up-to-date article as well, and we're talking about subclinical, iron deficiency. And you're right.
I'll send you the link.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. And I think that's a possibility. But just in many cases, there's so many other possibilities and stresses and reasons for people to feel.
Oh, for sure. I agree, 100%.
I feel like modern life grinds people down, and then in many cases they look for a physiological answer for something that's really a very difficult lifestyle that many of us lead right now, and sometimes when we take things, there's placebo effect, et cetera, et cetera. That is not to say that that I disagree with you. I think that it's so multifactorial, and many times it's just hard to know what's going on. But it's a valid point that you make as well.
Yeah, no, I 1,000% agree with you, Dr. Tushar. Totally agree with you that there's so many variables and you want to be careful to screen for other things. Are they sleeping well? Do they have any stress? Do they have any anxiety, low mood? Like, there's so many other factors. What I would kind of volunteer is that, if you've done your due diligence with patients and you've really kind of ruled those things out and you've said, hey, you know what, I can't figure this out. Everything seems to be optimized here. I did a sleep study. I did all these different tests. I don't see any great harm of iron supplementation, even as a trial, to see what happens and to see what the result in the patient is. Because oftentimes, that these small things, it's kind of this whole concept of the n=1 kind of philosophy that, everybody is very different. And sometimes doing an intervention that's not harmful can lead to great benefits. And another kind of analogy that comes to mind from my clinical practice is B12 injections. So you see everybody going into the doctor, everybody who maybe had slightly low B12 at one time or low normal B12, everybody's getting stabbed and everybody's getting injected in the arm with B12. And it kind of, if you're a new student or a medical student, you're fresh out of medical school, and you look at it, you say, kind of, what's going on here? But as you kind of go through your clinical practice and you kind of gain experience, you start to learn that, hey, wait a minute, first of all, intramuscular B12 is not, I mean, there's some evidence now with men and lung cancer and that kind of thing. So definitely that has to be considered. But in the grand scheme of things, you get people with chronic pain syndromes, you get people with various issues. And when they get these intramuscular B12 injections, it sometimes not only makes them feel better with whatever the mechanism is, not only makes them feel better, but it precludes them from going down rabbit holes of very aggressive investigations, very aggressive medications, potentially having very deleterious outcomes from those kinds of tests or more aggressive treatments, and it can save them from those things. So I think that this, again, it's a little bit of a kind of a thing where you have to really look carefully at the patient or look at the person, but there can be some value there.
Cool.
I'm just gonna say that from what it sounds like, you're just amazing as a medical doctor or practitioner.
I'm not as good as you, Dr.
No,
Tushar. I'm not as good as you.
No, I'm gonna congratulate. I'm gonna say something very positive here. That you know a lot of the science, and you also are really thinking about the art of medicine and how to reason and work and think with a patient, so that you're doing some intervention, but sometimes what that prevents you from doing other crazy stuff as well. So what you're describing there, I totally support. Just on the flip side, I also feel that a lot of people think that being vegan is some extreme thing, and you're not going to get enough protein. You're not going to get your omega-3s. You're not going to get your B12. And you need to be able to have supplements, and some of those supplements have to come in an injectable form. And I don't want people to feel that or believe that veganism requires injections, that veganism requires expensive supplements that are not accessible to so many people. When in reality, I think the data that we have really supports that we generally don't need supplements. We need a healthy diet. And with the exception of B12, which is very cheap, and very easy. And cyanocobalamin is a great source. Avi mentioned the good points about it. In addition to that, I work in developing countries. I like also the fact that it's shelf stable, And so I think for the vast majority of people, we don't need injections or any of those things of B12. But for selected people, sometimes you do it. It's part of the art of medicine as well.
Sweet. So I just wanted to laugh.
1,000% agree with you, Dr. Tushar, and I just want to go on the record as saying Dr. Avi and Dr. Tushar are the superior doctors, and I have huge respect for them. That's all.
This is such a toxic server.
Oh my God.
This is unacceptable toxicity. No, I really appreciate the vibe going on, and Discord servers generally aren't like this, so this is great. I mean, usually they're like, there's a rawness to them, so it's awesome to see people.
Having literally everyone muted helps.
Yeah, that is a small thing. Yeah. I guess this is less of a normal server, but I want to rapid fire some questions because I know people are getting very excited to ask your questions. So, sorry to make you wait. Here we have Cacti had a question. Do you want to hop on the mic and ask it for people? Can we give Cacti permissions real quick? I'm going to...
You have perms, Cacti. Okay. Go ahead.
Cactilicious.
I'm not sure my phone mic's that good.
Perfect. You're good.
Okay, cool. I'm just wondering about choline. I was interested when I saw your video, too, and your conversation with Avi, where you talked about if choline can raise your TMAO, but then there's the whole question whether that kind of TMAO even matters. But you specifically said in the video that if vegans supplement choline, it's going to raise their TMAO. But otherwise, if they just get choline from dietary sources, they're not going to raise it. So I'm wondering if that is relevant. I was supplementing choline for a while. I thought I liked it, but it's hard to get choline from foods and stuff, you know. So
how expensive was it? I'm curious because I haven't actually looked at the cost.
not too much, like 12 or something like.
And how long
Not
did
too
that
bad.
last?
I think it was like 90 days or something.
Okay, so it's like $4 a month. All right, so thank you so much for your question. I want to see what you doctors think. Avi and I had a conversation about this, and there is a lot of speculation going on. We didn't necessarily disagree on the potential threat of TMAO, and that's a very detailed, deep conversation that I think we can maybe finish another time. But if you guys just want to give your 2 cents, each 3 of you, just kind of rapid fire your 2 cents on choline for vegans.
Yeah, and this isn't even to do with. So just to disclose, I actually don't view that TMAO is going to be a problem, but I actually don't view that we should supplement with choline either. I don't see a reason for it. Not because I'm worried that it's gonna form TMAO and TMAO is gonna cause heart disease. I just don't think we need a reason to supplement it to get adequate amounts of it. I think the RDA was based off one study comparing, I think, levels between 550 with no intermediaries between them. And under 50, people develop certain liver problems. Well, that's a very, very low intake, and it wouldn't be hard for us to get adequate amounts of it just from food. I don't really see the need to supplement with choline. I'm not convinced that if we supplement with choline, it's necessarily going to be harmful because of TMAO conversion, but I don't see the need to actually do it.
Yep. Got it. So you don't find TMAO a threat. You also don't feel like vegans need to take choline. They can get enough from their diet. All right. So
Correct.
Any of the other 2 doctors have a position on it?
I think what Avi is saying is that, again, you don't want to rely too much on these physiologic mechanisms to say that this is the reason that something's bad, because there may be multiple pathways, and this may be one of the pathways for that results in negative health outcomes. This choline and TMAO stuff, but likely there's multiple pathways. It's multifactorial why animal products are bad for us. And exactly, I agree that we don't need to supplement it either. The meat and dairy industry and egg industry, they're going to come up with one thing after another to make you feel like you're not getting something. They're going to talk about choline, then you'll spend a lot of time obsessing over that and debunking that, and then they're going to come up with the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. This is what they're going to do,
You're describing my life.
Exactly. and what we have to see what really shows good clinical outcomes, and generally speaking, it's our dietary patterns, right? And these bogus things they come up with one after another. Don't let them. It may be $50 a year to supplement choline, but they're going to get you supplementing 10 different things. If you pay attention to it all. And what we really need to pay attention to is just a really good, healthy diet overall.
Yeah. The TMAO conversation is pretty complex. I mean, I mentioned that study a couple times in videos where the vegans were given choline supplements, their TMAO raised and their platelet aggregation raised, which led to another debate with me and Avi, which we'll talk about later. But Smod, did you have anything to add, or do you want me to move on to the next question?
No, I just agree with everything that they said. And a very, very quick point is that I know I'm a master derailer here, but with the evidence hierarchy, a lot of people in Carnus will say that, why do you even, like Barkay and people like that, why do you even believe in the evidence hierarchy? It was just made by some random person. The reason you believe in it is that it's founded on logic and principles of logic, that if you have something that's more powerful and more generalizable with more people, then it's more applicable and reflective of reality. So if somebody challenges the evidence hierarchy itself, just say that they're based on the laws of logic.
Cool. If someone wants to post the evidence hierarchy here, that'll be cool for people that aren't familiar with it. The next question is from Stux.
Sorry.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Just last little thing, Mike.
Tushar?
I think your video on the choline is great, And you're not wrong to bring up the physiologic things that you do. You're not wrong to, I think it's a great thing to do. And as long as we just know, that overall, there may be a lot of other pathways too.
Yeah, and it's clear that we just don't have a final answer on it, but I take a cautious approach of like, there's hints of a mechanism there in some studies for TMAO and atherosclerosis, and it's like, why would you put yourself at risk? Okay, so
Exactly.
Stuxnet,
Yeah.
we can give him permission, or her.
One sec. All right, him or her
That's
or they.
Stux.
Go ahead.
It's a him. Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yep, perfectly.
We can hear you.
Yeah, so I just want to ask about fiber and what's the optimal intake of fiber. So I think that the recommended daily intake would be something around 30, but I'm pretty sure you're aware that Dr. Greg recommends that we take something very high, like at the range of 80, 90, or even 100, and he references paleo diets or paleo evidence. I forgot his video.
Yep.
And so that's pretty normal of people who eat plant-based diets, given that they are very high in fiber by nature. And so I was just like interested, and I had this idea that it's pretty it's pretty good. Like fiber is one of those nutrients that you shouldn't be afraid of. The more you take, the better. I mean, it could be good for you through various mechanisms. I guess it has some anti-inflammatory properties. It also feeds the good bacteria in your microbiome. But that was until like, I don't know, yesterday, where Avi actually he said that he actually had some patients who have gastrointestinal problems because they were taking too much fiber. That kind of surprised me actually. So I just wanted to know, like, what is the optimal fiber intake for health?
Okay, thank you. So, Smod, our semi-anonymous doctor, had to leave. His battery's low, but that's good. I guess we'll be able to go through questions even faster. So, any fiber thoughts? Two remaining doctors.
Well, yeah. I mean, since I was mentioned, I guess I'll take this one for starters. Yeah. So the optimal. I don't think we have a pinpoint degree of optimal fiber intake, but I can tell you what the study that's being based off in thought process is, and I'm linking that in the think tank. So it's based off a stroke study, actually. And the findings of the stroke study was when soluble fiber was over 25 grams or insoluble fiber was 47 grams. In multivariate analysis, what they found was a benefit, decreased risk of all-cause stroke. Incidence of stroke was lower. Now, the point I disagree with is just adding the two. It was an or, not an and. I don't believe they necessarily found that when they added those two fibers, the insoluble and soluble fiber, that they got an even better benefit. And so by adding it, you get to 75, and then by appealing to some sort of, or by extrapolating to maybe if we were more plant-based, we would be over 100. Some have said that we can get over 100 grams of fiber, and that would be the optimal. I'm not convinced that that's optimal. And it may be, as far as the patients I've seen that have had problems for 100 plus grams of fiber a day, I don't know if that's because they just jumped right into it. They went on a vegan diet and then they started right off the bat with 100 grams of fiber, and then they're wondering why they are on the toilet all day, as opposed to building it up slowly, or if they just are people who specifically couldn't build up slowly to 100 grams of fiber, and for them just happened to, that's just too much for them, which is fine. You don't need to get 100 grams of fiber to have an optimal health. It's okay if you only get 40 or 50 grams of fiber.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what Avi's saying, I agree with totally. And I'm not one to start telling people that you should start measuring individual intake of nutrients, that you have, right? We shouldn't necessarily have to do that. Sometimes we do, but most of the time we don't. Most of the time we just want a generally good, healthy eating pattern. And so if we're eating our fruits and vegetables, we're eating our, pulses, legumes, and soy-based foods, and eating whole grains, you're going to get enough fiber. And that's it. That's all we really need to know. And we don't have to worry about it too much more. These studies are good, because they validate the fact that, yes, you know what, having more fiber leads to healthy outcome for stroke, for diverticulitis, maybe for some other things too, right? But so that validates that. But then in our lives, we don't have to worry too much about measuring it. We just have to be concerned with eating all the right foods, and we're going to be great.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So unless someone wants to put something else in there, we have Grape Main for the next question. So while we're unmuting them, yeah, the fiber thing, I'll give my take on fiber really quickly here with that. And I eat somewhere between 80 and 130 grams of fiber a day without even considering it. Yeah, like I just eat a lot of beans, and they don't do the bad things to me that they allegedly are supposed to do. And maybe my gut is just, I've never had a digestive problem in my life eating anything, so maybe I'm just okay there. Not 180 grams, max 130 grams, when I'm eating, I have my oatmeal and then I'm pounding down, some whole grains and veggies and legumes throughout the day, and it gets up there. And I'm also eating like 2,500 to 3,000 calories a day, maybe probably like 2,500. So it just goes there, and I don't have to really think about it, and it's not something I'm concerned about. I know I'm getting enough. So, all right, let's get the next question. Go for it, Great Main.
Hey, can you hear me fine?
Perfectly.
Awesome. I was just wondering if it's a realistic thing to worry about municipality water being safe from heavy metals, pharmaceuticals, fluoride, runoff fertilizer. Is that something I should worry about, or should I focus more on diet? What do you guys think?
Can I answer this really quickly? Because I, as somebody studying for a master's of public health, I have looked into this. Also, people ask me this like on a weekly basis. I just haven't done a video about it. First of all, you can actually check. There's a database where you can check your county's contaminants in your water, and which ones are going over. Because a lot of different municipalities are going over in certain things. In certain, like where I am, it's like radium is a little bit higher. It's probably not that big of a deal. I have a view on fluoride that a lot of people aren't going to like, that it is very beneficial for teeth, and that, like, I think one of the biggest problems that we could see vegans facing is just vegans as a group not using fluoride toothpaste or fluoride water and getting about a 20% increase in cavities from that. That's my take. I am not worried about calcified pineal glands. I think atherosclerosis is more likely to calcify your pineal gland than that. Anyway, we're getting off topic here, but what do you guys think, doctors?
I'm not super familiar with the data on fluoride, whether you're taking it in toothpaste or whether you're intaking it through water. I know that if it's very, very high, because I work in a part of rural India where they have super high fluoride levels and other minerals, you get fluorosis of teeth, which causes them to be fragile.
And that can happen naturally too. That's something I want to mention. It can be higher.
And that's just natural. That's just natural water that
huge point.
Is there. That is very, very, very high. But for the amounts that they add in North America and places like that, I don't know if there's a benefit or a harm. I wouldn't be able to say, And I don't know of studies of good quality that can tell us either. Generally speaking, like in Toronto and most places in Canada where I live, the municipal water is probably safer than bottled water that you can get, and it's better tested. There are some specific places where that may not be the case, so if you're concerned, I guess you can just check up what's going on locally. But a lot of the bottled water is not regulated in terms of whether there are different levels of bad things. The other thing about bottled water is that you can smell the plastic in bottled water.
Yeah.
And there are probably some, chemicals coming from the plastic, which may not be measured, and they may also have a negative effect on us too. So I'm a big proponent of the environment and that we should not be using plastic bottles for everything.
I agree, and a lot of times bottled water is, if it says purified water, it legally can just be bottled tap water, so it can have anything that's in the tap water that you don't want, plus it can have some leachate from the plastic. And a lot of times it will, to just show that it is chlorinated tap water, they actually have some, I think they're like methane-based bacterial byproducts from the chlorination process can be found in bottled water as well, proving that it is tap water in many cases. So spring water is better, but then again, like I would say dodge plastic completely. If you're really concerned, obviously you can get a filter if you can afford it, but it depends on where you live, how the water is. Like, for example, when I was traveling in Europe, you couldn't smell chlorine in the water at all. In the U.S., in my opinion, it's honestly disgusting, and like it's possibly could be affecting maybe some of our microbiome a little bit. I don't really know. I haven't seen any studies on that, but it is pretty powerful. Like when you sometimes, if you're closer to the water treatment plant, it's gonna be more powerful because they put enough chlorine in it to treat the entire line. So if you're close to that water treatment plant, it can be, man, you let loose on that spigot. It's like, oh, toxic smelling. Avi, do you have anything to say about this, or do you want to go to the next question?
No, I don't have much background knowledge on different municipalities. But all I know is that they're very. But I can tell you a general approach that I would take is that I would take an approach of, like you said, looking through the different municipalities and what the levels are, and calculating what your intake would be and what is the acceptable safe level of intake, and comparing it to that. That's a general approach that I would take to start.
Yep.
Yeah. And don't be paranoid. Don't be too
That's
paranoid.
true.
If something's
Right.
a little bit off, don't be too paranoid. I think again, our overall dietary pattern, again, that's going to be a much bigger bang for the buck in terms of your health.
Yeah, thank you, great Maine. And I will actually add, I did read studies on the fluoride being introduced into various populations, obviously the population studies, but it seemed to be lowering cavities by about 20 to 25%. Who knows if there were any other interventions going on at the same time, but that seems like a good thing to have. And so let's move on to the next one. Is Hammy's question. Hammy said we can just ask his question, but I'll give you an opportunity if you want to ask it, Hammy. I guess I'll just ask it. It's for Avi, and he wants to know what his. Are you doing it? Is he doing it?
We're unmuting Hammy.
Oh,
Everybody
unmuting
loves
Hammy.
Hammy.
Oh my God,
You gotta
Hammy,
love
Hammy,
Hammy.
Hammy.
All right, you're good, Hammy.
Hello, how's
up?
it going? What up, guys? I just wanted.
How you doing, man?
Hey, Avi, what's up, bro?
Hammy is the one who brought Avi to our world, just so everybody knows.
Okay.
Love you, Avi. Yeah,
Love
I
you
was
too,
just
Han.
wondering, get everybody's perspective on here. You guys were talking about iron deficient patients and what kind of things you'd suggest for them. I know Avi in the past has mentioned the Impossible Burger because it has a plant-based form of heme iron. So I'd like to just hear everybody's thoughts on if that would
So
be
let me
beneficial
be-
for those people.
Let me be very clear, because I don't want to be taken out of context with that. So this is what an idea, a case reports idea, or a case series idea for a very specific type of refractory anemia. It's for a very specific subset of a vegan population who has anemia, and they've tried iron supplementation, and they've tried the different various forms of iron supplementation, and they are still, despite that, have iron deficiency anemia for whatever reason. And instead of going to give them infusions of iron or transfusions, the idea is to try a case series or case reports for that specific, very rare type of patient, to try the Impossible Burger and see if, or some form of plant-based heme iron, and see if that increased absorption would help with the refractory anemia when other forms of iron supplementation wouldn't. So I want to be very clear, I'm not recommending people take plant-based heme iron as a first line if they have iron deficiency anemia. This is a research idea more than anything, because if it is the case that we have that specific, there's that rare subset of vegan patients who have refractory anemia and are not responding to any form, whether even iron gluconate forms of iron, the more bioavailable forms, then it may be worthwhile to consider plant-based heme iron as a form of a supplement.
Hey, is this Burger King? I'd like to order an Impossible Burger for my anemia.
There you go. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I would be amazed if these iron supplements, which are designed to be absorbed, and they're in higher amounts, are less absorbable. But maybe you're right. We'll see what happens. And I want to just say some interesting point that I heard the founder of Impossible Foods say. I want to say Pat Brown. He was mentioning that they could have actually had yeast ferment and create bovine hemoglobin, but they ended up going with their original idea of soy leg hemoglobin because it actually oxidized less, which is promising in two ways. One, it actually leaves potential for this burger someday, or possibly already now, if it was an objective test, to actually taste better and cook better through that lower oxidization than actual beef animal flesh. And also it means that it could have a less of an effect on colorectal cancer if that is a full mechanism that you subscribe to, the heme iron creating this issue. And if that is the case, then this could be healthier heme iron as well. So, but it's still probably not a health food in general. At least that's my view. It's up to you to make that view. Dr. T, do you have anything to put in there? And then I will say we should probably maybe go another just like 10 or 15 minutes to keep this not going too long. At least I'll stop recording then. So.
Yeah, that long train of thought. What was the original question?
Do you eat Burger King? No, I'm joking. What are your thoughts on heme iron in the Impossible Burger, just in general?
Heme iron. First of all, I don't know how much is there. So I haven't studied it, and I don't know if it's hemoglobin or another type of heme itself.
It's another type of.
It's another type of heme. Okay.
It's like heme. Well, the component is the same.
I think it brings up really the issue of transition foods. I think that's the bigger underlying issue here, and the bigger issue, and the rational use of transition foods. That these transition foods are very likely better than meat, but not as good as eating the oatmeal and the beans that Mike was talking about. And so, we use some of these transition foods here and there. Great. It's a great stepping stone for people, but we want to also trend towards the whole foods themselves, regardless of whether there's heme or not heme or whatever.
Yep. It's interesting because the whole goal, and I highly suggest people who are interested in it watching Rich Roll's talk with Pat Brown. The goal is to make something that tastes better than animal products and completely eliminating all animal farming by 2035. So they're going to hit every single product. So I know there's been some controversy about their testing and stuff, which is just a shame, but I wish them luck in getting everything done. So the next question officially is net layer. Not on the mic. What about D3 in cold climates, specifically probably referring to northern latitudes where you don't have that UV radiation making it through the atmosphere? Assuming you're talking about supplementation.
Yeah. Again, I think that a lot of the studies about vitamin D3 or vitamin D supplementation, there's some that show benefit, some that don't show benefit. We don't have specific studies looking at people like myself, dark-skinned person living up north in Canada. And so it's hard to really know, to tell you the truth. I think it's hard to know. I think that maybe we can supplement if we're not getting a lot of sunlight. Maybe elderly people. There's some elderly people or people who are disabled that are always indoors. They never get out to the sunlight. Maybe supplementation is good for those specific populations. But again, we'd have to look at studies in context.
Yep.
And then there's the radiologists.
Wait, what about the radiologist?
That was just an inside joke that only the doctors would get.
Yeah. Okay. Doctor humor. Yeah. Stethoscope humor.
I didn't get it.
No, it's like they spend their whole day in the dark. They spend their whole day in those dark rooms. Come on.
I know radiologists that live in Hawaii and they like emergency films.
Oh
no. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, I think they're getting some good sunlight. But yeah, Evan, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you have a deficiency, supplement. Other than that, or if you can be shown that you're in this, like, let's say you moved up north and then you didn't have a deficiency and now you have this deficiency. Again, it's contextual. If that's the case, sure, go ahead, supplement. But would I make this blanket recommendation that everyone living in this northern latitude to supplement? No, because there's going to be a good proportion of people who are not going to be deficient. And I don't see a reason that they would supplement. So it's contextual.
I also see almost everybody who's tested being deficient. So
that's what I was going to say. Everyone here.
Levels, like what are the normal levels, and have they adequately determined what the normal levels are?
I think that's up for debate.
That's
All of these are up for debate. That's the problem. Is whenever you look closer and closer at any one of these issues, there's some questions there. So I guess we can move on from that. I think that the question has been answered.
One thing is that one of the main reasons why we think about vitamin D is because we're thinking about our bone health and we're thinking about osteoporosis, right? So look at the factors that really do affect not just osteoporosis, but fractures in our older age. Those are the things that we want to look at, right? So we want to make sure that calcium intake is adequate. It doesn't have to be what the American or Canadian government says, but more than, let's say, 600-700 milligrams per day seems to be good, because there's an EPIC study showing that less than that you get more fractures. Eating adequate fruits and vegetables, having enough protein, and all the different lifestyle factors, exercise, those are the bigger things. There's much more research showing that those things are important as opposed to vitamin D. So there may be some other reasons that vitamin D is important, but again, the data is haphazard.
And we'll jump into the next question, but in my recent video, I just talked in detail about how this study's been, used to be like, hey, vegan bones suck because the bone mineral density is a little bit lower, like very slightly lower. And it's very clear that if you look at the BMI trend for it, it's right in line, if not slightly even better on the trend for BMI, with that about 6-point difference in BMI between your average vegan and the average omnivore. And it's pulling from a bunch of studies, so it's hard to pinpoint it exactly, but that's huge. So let's get Adam and Evie on the mic for the next question.
Hi. Thanks for putting this together.
Yeah, no problem at
all. So my question is about my wife and my newborn. My wife's breastfeeding, and I'm wondering if there's certain things we should be considering in addition to her prenatal vitamins. And then also when my child, she's probably going to, be eating vegan because that's what we're doing. If there's stuff we need to consider for toddlers. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much. Great question, especially as more vegans are having children. What do you need to do in terms of breastfeeding for stuff? And do you want to maybe mention DHA is one thing I hear a lot about in conjunction with the breastfeeding. We talked about that earlier, but if you guys have a different position on that, feel free to share it.
Avi?
Yeah. So again, I'm not aware of strong data suggesting that one should supplement with EPA DHA that's tied to any outcome that we can measure that changes whether it's cognitive outcomes or health outcomes in children. I would be interested if someone does have that. What I would recommend, first of all, it's good that she is breastfeeding. I would recommend exclusive breastfeeding at least for 6 months. That's something that's pretty much consensus, if possible. And that is in and of itself, as opposed to not breastfeeding, associated with improved clinical outcomes in the child. Other than, I don't have any strict recommendations other than prenatal vitamins and eating a well-balanced plant-based diet.
Sweet. One really good research is the Plantrition Project.
Oh, yeah.
I would go onto the Plantrition Project website. They have a fantastic recommendation, a guideline for vegan babies and children. And so it's great. The books that I think are fantastic are Vegan for Life and Becoming Vegan. They're both very evidence-based, and they really go nicely through breastfeeding and pregnancy, and for children as well. So they're great resources, and they're really evidence-based and really level-headed. That's the thing about them. So those are 3 good sources, those 2 books and plus the Plantrition Project. So I think that's great. And then DHA, I'm going to also say that I have a lot of articles in my computer, but that doesn't mean that I remember all of them right now.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And so I don't want to give a definitive answer whether it's important or not. I think there is some DHA that, a woman produces in her body, which will be expressed in the breast milk too. And whatever, if somebody can breastfeed, that is the best thing. If somebody's having troubles, it's okay not to be OCD. Go ahead and throw in some formula, and we try to get the plant-based formulas as best as we can. They may not be perfectly vegan, but we do our best, And hopefully there'll be a one that will be totally vegan coming soon, right? And and that there will have some amount of DHA that probably mimics DHA EPA that mimics what breast milk has. That's what they're going to try to do. And if you are a woman who's breastfeeding pregnant, then if I was in that position, I'd take a bit of DHA, just more because of the anxiety of what everybody's talking about it, necessarily than evidence-based, but certainly having all the nuts and seeds and all the different things that provide me the omega-3s that my body will then process into the things that it needs to.
And then really quick rapid fire, if you guys have one, what is a good like first couple foods to be giving your child as they wean off breast milk?
Good question.
Yeah,
if I was a parent, if I was a parent, I'd know. I would go with the standard cereals, and when I look at my family in India, they just feed them everything a lot earlier than any of the recommendations over here. So,
yeah, I mean those kind of like mushy little carrot baby food things are probably good. I mean, it's probably
I don't know.
This is my first.
Yeah, baby food.
It's honestly a lot of
baby foods were my first thought, but this is always the problem with being neither a parent nor a pediatrician.
I think we need to add that to accidentally vegan foods, baby foods. That's hilarious. Yeah, there's a little section in there for those that don't know. Okay, let's hop right on to the next one. Not on Mike. Pumpkin Butter asks, on the heavy metals topic, I'm curious about the Proposition 65 warning on food labels. I have only looked into that a little bit, not sure about you guys, but it seems that if it has any amount of any potentially carcinogenic substance, that it will get that warning whether or not there's a clinical threat. That doesn't mean it should always be ignored, in my opinion, in my unprofessional opinion, but I think a lot of times, and honestly, I think there's so many that people are just becoming numb to it. Like it's a joke. People look at a Prop 65 warning in California and they go, that's a joke. So a lot of times, so...
Yeah, the thing to consider here is the disease is always made by the dosage. There's really no compound for which one atom or one molecule of something is going to actually cause a clinical harm to you. And so, again, don't be OCD, like calculating everything. You don't necessarily have to do that, but the point is that just because something has a certain amount of a heavy metal, just about anything you eat, by the way, is going to have some amount of heavy metal. Fruits can have some amount of heavy metals. It's not going to be enough to harm you at all, but they exist. And the point is not if they exist in them. The point is, did they exist in sufficient quantities to actually cause clinical outcomes? And that's the key takeaway.
Cool. Yeah, might as well keep rapid firing. I think we're going to wrap up. Oh, yeah, go for it.
No, I totally agree. And what was I going to say? Just there are specific examples where some fruit or something grown somewhere has disproportionately high amounts, so we're just aware of those things when they're disproportionate, basically.
Cool. So on the mic we have Ichigo 9. If somebody wants to unmute, go for it. Hey, how's it going?
Am I on?
Yes, you're on.
Oh, okay. Big fan, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Videos for. And so I was wondering what your thoughts are on China study and.
China study and what?
Oh, just like China study.
Okay, so thoughts on the China study. We can just really quickly, I guess, nutshell each. China study is the first plant-based book that I read that made me go vegan that day, and it wasn't because of the China study chapter. It was because of other things in there about heart disease and things like that. If you guys have any, I know it's been criticized a lot, especially by the low-carb camp. I mean, I'm sure, Avi, you probably have some things to say about it. Tushar, too.
Yeah, go ahead, Tushar. Sorry. No, you spoke first.
No, that's all right. Well, all I was saying is that China study is a good study, but it's a starting point. It's one of the early kind of studies that starting point.
I love this guy. You took the words right out of my mouth. I was literally about to say starting point. Oh my god.
Yeah, and same, Avi. Actually, we have to get each other's number after this, and be in touch with each other, because I think everything you say, I just 100% is like, yeah, that's what I was going to say. Or
Man Crush Mondays.
Yes. Oh my god.
Totally.
Well, Tushar, if you ask Avi where the number one place he spends time is, he'll tell you.
Oh yeah, Toronto.
Discord.
Discord.
You should come to the server, spend more time here.
I see what you're saying. All right. But anyways, it's a starting point. It's a small study. It gives us some initial data. And since then, it's not the China study that clinches things for us. It's the thing that really starts us off. And since that time, we have so many diverse and interesting studies, none of which are perfect, and the China study is not perfect either. But we build our knowledge through looking at study after study after study and sort of build the landscape of our knowledge, that way. So it's a starting point, and there's many good studies afterwards. And I don't think there's any one study that really clinches everything, but we look at them all together in context of each other with their relative strengths and weaknesses, and build our understanding that way.
Well said. Well said. So let's just keep it moving on right now. Not on mic, Castor Troy. Have the doctors recommended any plant-based diets to their patients? If so, what has the compliance/retention rates been? So how well has pushing plant-based diets on your patients, if you have done it, been?
Oh boy.
I do this on a daily basis. I actually have links to. Yeah, it's me. Sorry, I'm back. I have links to Dr. Furman's and Dr. Bernard's talks saved in my clinic, and I just email them straight to the patient when I'm counseling them on diet. And I do have some anecdotes about my patients. One of them was a woman who had a high cholesterol and a high Framingham risk score, so a high chance of heart disease. Or I mean, I shouldn't say that. I should say a predictively high chance of heart disease. And the recommendation based on that would have been to start a statin-type medication to reduce her risk of heart disease. She had enough risk factors between her cholesterol and age and various other factors. And she was really very much against that. So I did counsel her on diet and a plant-based diet. And after about 6 months, her cholesterol scores dropped tremendously to the point where her Framingham risk score was in the low risk range. And then I had other patients who switched because of counseling and also Game Changers. After watching Game Changers, that was kind of the initial thing that set them off. And then they started watching multiple documentaries. And once they went plant-based, they said that virtually all their problems went away: constipation, low energy, things like that. So yeah, I have something saved in my practice, and I just email patients when I'm counseling them about it. I also send them Simnet Nutrition's recipes.
Nice. Love him. He has a lot of unprocessed vegan recipes, and I highly check him out. He's also a dietitian or semi-nutritionist. So Chick was looking for nutritionists on YouTube. I would say that, and this is just a matter of your personal choice, but I would say don't listen to just one person. And this is just my personal advice. Check out a few of them, and Simnet Nutrition is definitely one that I think is legit and you should listen to an extent. Simnet Nutrition, Simnett Nutrition, has a YouTube channel. He does fitness stuff. He's super jacked. He has crazy abs, and he also watches my channel sometimes. And thank you so much. And he also has great nutritional things. He talks about the different synergistic effects of plants and stuff and whole foods without getting too sort of caught up in the details, which I think is great. And I didn't mean to cut anybody off. If I did, let me know. Otherwise, I actually kind of skipped a question because it was sort of relevant. But not on mic, Pumpkin Butter asks, opinions on alpha GPC for pregnancy and breastfeeding. Is that a supplement, I assume? If you guys don't know,
I have no idea what that is.
I think this is probably the name. Oh, alpha, it's a natural choline. Okay, so this is just a particular type of choline supplementation. So we've talked about choline supplementation. So you're just asking in the context of rearing children. I think the consensus between everybody was that choline supplementation is not necessary in vegans, and you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Don't worry about it. Don't get it. Don't waste your money.
Yeah, it's actually alpha glyceryl phosphoryl-choline. So it's actually just another way of saying it's a type of choline. Cool.
If you go to the supplement aisle of any health food store or any pharmacy, it's huge. And do you really think that you need to take one of every one of those pills? No. There's too many things marketed at us, playing on our anxieties, and we have to be more concerned. I think this is a point that I forgot to mention, is that there is a phenomena of people getting way too anxious about all these details about our health.
Yes.
And that in itself is a big problem. And then there's this multi-billion-dollar supplement industry that really takes advantage of that. So aside from the very relevant, the certain relevant things, okay, B12, okay, maybe iron if you're iron deficient, or maybe vitamin D if you're vitamin D deficient, maybe some DHA, okay, maybe okay, but let's not get out of control. Be very careful for all of us that we're not getting OCD about all the different things that are thrown at us to make us anxious and make us feel inadequate and make us start going after all these things and spending money. Not only spending money, but being anxious and all this kind of stuff. It's not good.
Yeah, I agree. And it's hard because there's legit things. So it's like someone says, okay, you need a B12 supplement, you need a B12 supplement. And then I think the consensus is, yes, you do. But then it's like, oh, then you also need this supplement. But is that real? The other one was real. How come, is this real? I don't know. And so, again, for me, it's about like sort of gauging consensus. And then, of course, looking at the data. But not everybody is equipped to look at the data. So it's like this sort of catch-22. So it's not an easy thing. So I think that I'm going to do one last question here. Stux is their new one. Okay, it's a climate change question. We could maybe close on that. I'm trying to think. Let's just no.
I do kind of have to go myself as well.
I was gonna say,
but I'll stick around for this one question.
So let's just hop with the last health one, and then we will kind of close on that. I'll probably stop the recording, and then we can talk about the climate change thing for a little bit, and then I'll close it out for the night. Okay, so not on the mic, Stux.net or net asks thoughts on Esselstyn and Dean Ornish's works on heart disease and Ornish's prostate cancer study, and whether they successfully established causality in their trials or not. Hi, Bar.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So with respect to the Esselstyn studies, the Esselstyn study, the issue with that one, that is the criticism, is that it wasn't technically a vegan study. Now, to what degree the skim milk that they had matters or not, I'm not quite sure, and I'm not quite convinced that if their skim milk wasn't there, would the results be any different? I don't really think so, but yes, technically it was not a vegan study. Part of the dietary intervention did actually have had animal products. And then the issue with the Ornish study was that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's been some time. I've read both studies cover to cover, but the issue is that their study design in their clinical trial was that they took the patients who started off in the treatment group. Oh, sorry, I'm confusing it. Never mind. It's the Ornish study that had skim milk.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was actually didn't want to.
I knew.
Jump in.
Yeah. I knew I was confusing this. Yeah. Ornish. I was like, what? Something I'm saying isn't clicking with.
Yeah,
with
it says
me,
right in the
Ornish
abstract that no animal products were given in that.
Yeah. Esselstyn. Yeah, it's the reverse. I was like, no, the Esselstyn study had the problem with the control, not the Ornish. Ornish had a good control. So the Ornish study had a good control, but it wasn't a vegan study. The Esselstyn study was a vegan study, but it had the opposite problem, which they didn't have the best control methodology. So the issue was the people who were in the treatment group that started off were then and didn't end up doing well on the intervention, ended up getting swapped into the control group. So again, I'll say these studies are a starting point. Do they have the rigor of the clinical trial? In the Esselstyn study, not. In the Ornish study, they did, but they weren't. It wasn't technically vegan. But I do think that there are animal products, such as in issues with animal products like dietary cholesterol and saturated fat, that can be shown to be causal through other means. But that's a conversation for a later time. So I am convinced that there is causality there. I just don't think that the rigor of the Esselstyn and Ornish studies get you there in and of themselves.
Yep. And while you're talking about this, my current Masters in Public Health project is actually designing what would be the perfect hybrid between these two studies. It has, good randomization into a control group, and it has, the proper imaging, and it has obviously a whole food vegan diet. And then also Ornish had good, some good results, but I think that he was missing out on some of the nitrate artery benefits and things like that. So eating these dietary nitrates would be cool. So Tushar, you got any input on that? I mean,
I think they're both pretty strong studies. I think they're not perfect, and the Ornish study is smaller, of course, and it's not completely vegan. And also, they were doing yoga in the intervention group, and whereas the Esselstyn's study is completely dietary, not changing any exercise behaviors. But I think that considering all we know, in the context of all we know about dietary cholesterol, saturated fats, and all these other things, I think these are very powerful studies. And another criticism is just that there's only 2 of these studies, and that they're both not that big. But we could do a larger study. But I think they may not prove 100% beyond all doubt causality, but I think that they do show causality. Just common sense included with all the the technical analysis as well. They're pretty good. And I'd love to see Mike's study get done also.
Yeah, maybe someday. Who knows if it'll ever happen. Yeah. Also, I have gotten in a debate with a very skeptical plant-based cardiologist who does not believe, like, they literally believe that it could be an artery spasm reversing in the in that before and after angiogram. They just don't want to, and part of it is because they don't want to look crazy to other cardiologists, it seems to me. But for me, it's like when you take, even if it's not a control group, even if you're looking at, how would you even say? I mean, even if you're just looking at 198 case studies showing that there's 100 times lower heart attack and stroke in one group than the other, there's value to that. There's not the
morbidity and mortality. It's not just an angiogram-based study. There's a morbidity and mortality difference.
Yep.
And that's the part that really makes it strong.
They still support it, and they still support the diet. They are just careful to say that it's actually unclogging arteries. But that's debate for another time. So Tushar, I know you have to go. If you want to have any, final statements, or just say goodbye.
I think thank you so much, and Avi will connect. Mike,
let's connect.
I'm always impressed. You guys are so brilliant. You're smarter than I am, but sometimes I'm just older, and so I see maybe more of a bird's eye view. I don't know, but yeah, I'd love to. And the other thing was just coming back to the protein issue. There are vegans or vegetarians who don't consume enough protein. I've seen that happen. And what the bigger point is here is that human behavior is so variable. You see people going, they're maybe vegan, they may be even so-called whole food plant-based, but they have such still very different behaviors from each other. If you analyze how much of this or that they're consuming, they're all over the map. And so for some people, protein still may be an issue. And generally speaking, people are quite variable. And so we do need to take that into account and try to get people on a rational path, considering that we're just all over the map sometimes, even if we're quote unquote vegan, whole food, plant based.
And I want to add, it's funny, I met somebody who's like very vegan, whole food, plant based, no oil, but then drinks like a lot of alcohol, and it's like, what are you doing?
Yeah, exactly, those kind of things. Yeah. All right, guys, peace, and
thanks so much.
Thank you so much for inviting
Mr. Maida. Thanks so much.
Okay.
And then Smod, if you have anything to put in, I didn't mean to bury you there. When you left, I got in the habit of just bouncing back between those two. If you have anything to say about those heart disease studies or any of the questions, feel free to jump in. But other than that, I think I might want to just cut it off here. We're approaching 2 hours, which is, a pretty amazing long time, and everybody has been very super well behaved, which is amazing. And I'm very much loving this as a first night for this server ever, being at least announced. I still think, the way people watch my videos is it's about 1,000 views per hour for the first 24 hours a lot of the time. So even though I announced it, and even though, it's out there and the video is released, probably not that many people have even watched that video yet. So they don't know about the Discord server. So over the next few days, probably a lot of people will join. We'll see. So stay tuned for that. I guess just major thanks to Avi and Smod as well for coming in. If you guys have any final points you want to mention, feel free to pop it out.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for bringing us doctors together. So big thanks to you, Mike the Vegan. And I just want to say, first of all, if anyone here hasn't, go vegan. And second of all, just contextualize everything and place it within the confines of the evidence hierarchy, and try to be as rigorous as you can. Don't go overboard. Don't go like what was said earlier, don't get too neurotic about nutrition. But if anyone has any questions, you guys know where to find me. I'm in this Discord. I'm in the Ask Yourself Discord. I have my own Discord, which is the Study Archives, which has a whole bunch of links to any journals. And if you have any questions, feel free to ping me. If I have time, I'll be happy to try to answer.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on, and thanks so much, Smod. I don't know if you just want to say goodbye quick or if you can't talk.
Yeah, no, sure. Thanks a lot, Mike. I'm a big fan of you and of your work. I really love your videos. And it's awesome that you have this Discord. Thanks for allowing me to contribute. Yeah, I have a huge respect for these other two guys. They're very smart, and it's great to talk with them and to talk to everybody. I would say, I guess, yeah, my takeaway, my final points or the takeaway that some people might garner from this discussion is, I think I like Dr. Tushar's approach, and also Dr. Avi has this approach too of not being too aggressive with focusing on mechanism. I mean, obviously, mechanism is super important, but make sure you don't lose sight of clinical endpoints and kind of where a certain treatment leads in terms of outcomes. And look at very broad, powerful things like 7DA study and all these other studies that focus on mortality, because that's what's actually happening clinically. So I think that's super important and something to focus on. And but anyway, I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Awesome.
I'll plug your channel for you. Everyone go subscribe to Tactical Medicine.
Word. That's a YouTube channel?
That's Smod's channel.
All right, great. Tactical Medicine. I'll link that in below. All right, so I think we're calling it now. If you are watching this on my second YouTube channel, Mike the Vegan 2, feel free to let us know down below what you think. Like, subscribe if you haven't already to this. And I might post this as a podcast, so if it's posted as a podcast, do whatever you're supposed to do for podcasts that helps. I don't know, rate it, something good. All right, that's it for today. So thanks so much for listening, and I'm cutting off the stream.